So just look around you, look at this fantastic global city that we live in, look at the architecture, just think of the amazing wealth that had to be created all over the world to create the city that we live in today. All of us are beneficiaries of the wealth created by the entrepreneurial spirit of Hong Kong. So for 100 years, Hong Kong filled the coffers of London. And when we left Hong Kong, we promised that for 50 more years we would guarantee civil rights in Hong Kong, and we have let the people of Hong Kong down. So what can we do? I mean, it seems as though, for me personally, what am I going to do to stand up to the tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party, which is so overwhelming, that has caused so much trouble already around the world and which continues to do so? For me personally, what can I do? Well, I do believe that each one of us can light one candle, and if you can save one person, you can save the world. And so each of us needs to say, yes, what can I do? I can, in what way do I interact with China, for example, am I a consumer of Chinese goods? For example, can I write to my Member of Parliament and ask for Britain to take a stand because of our unique interaction in the history of Hong Kong, because we were part of creating Hong Kong. We promised this generation of Hong Kongers civil rights, liberal democracy, and so the UK Parliament needs to make a stand, and if we, after all, can have sanctions against Russia, can we not also have sanctions against China? If everybody would write to their Member of Parliament, if everybody would come out and speak, if everybody would write to national newspapers, then each of us can make one stand, and we can each save one person. And if we each save one person, then we can save the world. Hong Kong is just one step, and once dissension is crushed in Hong Kong, the next step is Taiwan. So for people who live in England, and you might think, well, I don't have anything to do with Hong Kong, okay, you can make this a historical argument, but that doesn't really apply to me. But you might have friends, for example, who live in, or relatives who live in Australia or New Zealand. Do you really think that if China invades Taiwan, that's not going to massively affect Australia and New Zealand? And don't you think that the very severe lockdown in Australia and New Zealand, might that be because they are getting their citizens ready for being vassals of the communist state? That the next step, because every time a farm comes up for sale, every time a big business comes up for sale in Australia, the Chinese government or agents of the Chinese government buy it. And so we know Australia's next on the list. And once that happens, just think about the state of liberal democracy across the world. Do you really think that if liberal democracy disappears across vast swathes of the world, that's not going to come home and affect you eventually? Eventually, it's going to be your child who's a journalist. Even if you don't care about someone else's child, just think what will happen in the future, in the next generation, if we don't keep liberal democracy alive all over the world. Next time, it's going to be your son or daughter or your friend's child who has civil liberties denied them. So it's very important that we stand up now, that we nip this in the bud, that we do everything we can do, because at least then, when our children are being arrested, we can say, well, I did what I could. And at least then we can rest easy. We can do what we can. There's a really great opportunities in there. I mean, a lot of people are blaming China for the pandemic. So isn't this a great opportunity to say, well, look, this is how it can affect you personally. So the last 2 years have been terrible for young people. So surely you want them to get back to their lives. Surely you would like to make a stand against the Chinese government. You know, if only for the pandemic, because that's only the first thing. The next thing is, really that in America they see I'm waiting for the second shoe to drop. My name's Elizabeth Botsford, and I'm a lawyer. And when I was very young, when I was a young person, I lived in Hong Kong briefly, and I had a really fantastic time. And I think that Hong Kong is such an extraordinary place. It's where East meets West, and neither gets enough sleep. And I think, when we look at what a jewel Hong Kong has been in the history of England, where we live in this very wealthy, very international town, and what an extraordinary asset Hong Kong was to Britain. And I really want you to know how welcome you are into English society.
香港大紀元已經開設後備頻道，請點擊旁邊香港大紀元頻道同訂閱。請支持我哋傳遞真實新聞。